Well, afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. Awesome turnout. I mean, quite a few people online. My name's Rory. I'm one of the organizers with Dan and Will. I heard you can't be here today. Some housekeeping. Toilets are down next to the lifts. The fire escapes are down there as well. The fire alarm went. Microsoft people down there. I'd also like to welcome the Azure user groups in Hamilton, Wellington, and Dunedin who come and join these sessions these days because we try and be more collegiate. Next slide. I can do it from here. So that's the contents today. Welcome. We're going to do a bit of a What's New in Azure talk. Over to Judy for her talk and then Q&A. So one of the things that we've now added, code of conduct, is up on the meetup under the About tab. Basically, it just means be friendly, be respectful, be polite. No harassment is allowed at all. And if people break the rules, we're going to be asked to leave. So what's new in Azure? So what I do is I do Microsoft Identity. So needless to say, it will be about identity. For some of you that don't know, what used to be Azure Active Directory has now been incorporated into a bigger project. It's called Microsoft Entra. So Microsoft Entra is the old Azure AD. It's permissions management, which is a whole lot of entitlement stuff. It's a verified ID, which I'll talk about just now. A whole lot of governance, and a whole lot of workload identities. Because one of the trends that Microsoft has picked up is that there are now far more non-human identities, things like service principles and that kind of thing, than there are actual human identities. And that needs to be managed securely in all the same ways that your identities are managed securely. So verified identities, for those of you who don't know, is, I guess you could say, the next new thing in identity. A lot of breaches lately, and that's because a company stores all your details. So verified identity is basically you own your own identity. It's not stored in any company database. It's all stored on the blockchain. What happens is, for example, you join Microsoft, and on day one, your Authenticate app on your phone pops up a QR code. It puts a verified credential into Authenticator. A verified credential is just like a loyalty card, but it's got claims behind it. So it's got a whole lot of claims that prove that you work for Microsoft. Maybe go to a shop that gives a discount to Microsoft employees. You go there, you scan the QR code. The Authenticator will ask you which verified identity you want to use. You pick one of them. That passes that set of claims to the shop. Get your discount. So you can have a whole lot of different verified identities. Each of them can have a different set of claims. And the idea is that you don't give someone who just wants your first and last name, you don't give them your whole history. That's all you give them. And you own it. It lives on your phone. It does not live in Azure AD or B2C or any other identity repository. So if you think that forward, what it does open up is things like, for example, digitized passports. So you could have the passport as a verified identity. You come into customs, you can simply scan it. So that's definitely something to watch for the future. Okay, so they've added certificate-based authentication, now generally available, and now have the different degrees of conditional access. So not only do you require MFA, but for super secure, you've got to have a FIDO security key as well. So there's different levels of that. And for those of you who still use ADFS, they've now got a really good set of PowerShell scripts and things like that. You can run it across your ADFS database, and it will tell you what you can migrate to Azure, the scripts to do it. So for a lot of people, there's really no need to be on ADFS, and you can move a lot of stuff to the cloud. So workload identities will be generally available at the end of this month. Basically, you can see on the bottom, the number of workload or non-human identities has more than tripled. the moment, it's a ratio of 5 to 1, predicting that it's going to be maybe 20 or 30 to 1. So there's a whole solution for managing these non-human identities. That's what's been happening in the identity world, and that's what was ignited at Ignite. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Judy, the main event.
Cool. Just a sound check for the people online. Can you hear me? For the people online? Yeah. Right. Yeah, before I begin.
All good.
Thank you. Thank you. Before I begin, I just want to say it's really cool to see everyone in person here. It's been such a long time since I came out and join a conference or do a talk, and it's always good to interact with people in person. It's good to see people in 3D, and of course, I also want to thank the people who joined online. So that you find this talk useful, and if not, the people who are here, you've been fed. There's free food. Right, cool. So fast-moving consumer goods, on-premise constraints, and migrating workloads to Azure. We'll do a bit of a rewind. March 2020. So my wife and I was actually here in this beautiful island like this. It was a long overdue holiday for us, so it was really good. And the best part is it was child-free. So as a parent, when you go on a holiday without a kid, what do you do? So for us, and in no particular order, so we ate, slept, we drank, like in peace. For the most part, in that duration, you kind of do it over and over and over until you snap back to reality. So after that very beautiful holiday, went back to reality, as anyone would do when you come back from a holiday, whether you came from Coromandel or somewhere in Queenstown, pop by your local and get your essentials, if you will. So went to our local and grab a couple of essentials, and that's usually milk and toilet paper. March. I was casually walking, grabbed the milk. The selection wasn't so great, but anyway, whatever I found, I was tired. And then as I walked towards the shelves for toilet paper, true story, and this is a photo I took, this is what I found. It was empty. I was like, surprised to say, after a couple of days, it was announced that New Zealand is moving to a level 4 lockdown, and things were never the same again. Kia ora. I thought I'd introduce myself. I'm Judy. I'm the head of architecture at Countdown. And some of you may still refer to it as Progressive Enterprise for transparency. Back in 2018, we rebranded from Progressive to Woolworths New Zealand, but of course, in the household, we're more commonly known as Countdown Supermarkets. Prior to stepping into this role, I was a cloud solutions architect, and also I was the product owner for cloud platforms and infrastructure at Countdown. I'm a DevOps advocate, so a bit of writing infrastructure as code and scripting in my time back then. And then prior to that, I was a software developer. Outside work, my wife and I had to do a lot of MumOps, raising a not so little kid anymore, so he's a teenager now. And of course, as everyone knows, if you have a teenager, usually they would just lock themselves in their room. Unfortunately for him, Mummy works in IT, so not only does he have a technical support in-house, Mummy can also switch off the internet across all his devices. Good. We have a pretty needy cat called Keanu, who's keeping me up at night. And of course, because the theme is around talking about COVID and what we've done at the time, point that was one of my during lockdown, and I'm sure some of you would have been as well. Because we don't have access to hairdressers. Right. For this talk, what we'll cover, so we'll set the scene, talk about our environment setup, and the solutions we explored to migrate our workloads to Azure, what the outcomes were, or that the learnings that we took, and then the more fun part, the post-migration activities. So what did we do after migrating our workloads to Azure? Cool. So to set the scene, here's a question for everyone. Who led the digital transformation in your company? Takers? No. For us, fortunately for us, the work was already in the pipe, and it just so happened that COVID happened, which meant it sped things up for us at Countdown. So I want to describe what's the problem that we're trying to solve here. Why did we want to move our workloads to Azure? So for starters, when you're in a fast moving consumer goods industry and the nature of your business is to provide food on the table, it's really important that the systems that enable those is one, performant, and second of all, in the face of disaster, it can recover quickly as soon as possible. And given that majority of our workloads are still on premise, what that meant for us is that if something goes wrong, it's really challenging for us to recover quickly. So, and also having said that, with COVID, we had unprecedented system load as well. So, with people ordering online, usually the resolution to some of those performance issues would be to slap in more resources to it, yada, yada, yada. Because we have chip shortage, we have supply chain issues and all that stuff. That also meant that if you were to procure any hardware, that would take at least, the lead time that we got given by the vendor was 6 to 9 months. So we knew that we had to do something outside the usual thing that we would do. Just to add a little bit of meat to the conversation, so I'll check in here the critical business systems that I'm going to be talking about and the ones that we migrated to Azure at the time during COVID lockdown. So we have Shop, so this is our customer front-facing e-commerce website. Pick, I'll call it Pick, and this is our back-end order fulfillment system. So this is the system that our teams use when they're picking orders and fulfilling it. We also have Pay, so this is our payment app. We do have a master data feed from SAP, so for the purpose of this talk, we'll call it Feed. And finally, we have a store team rostering system, so we'll call it Roster. So closer look to what our server looks like in terms of the VM count and the operating system that we use. So as you can imagine, we have servers from Windows Server 2008 R2, Windows Server 2012, 2016, 16 core, server core, Red Hat, CentOS, so we like making things hard for ourselves. From a database standpoint, that's also a good mix of SQL Server 2012, 2014, 2016, 2017. And we've got different recovery solutions from always on availability group, log shipping, and recovery where it's non-existent, where you have a database running in a single instance. RPOs, RTOs, and MTOs, I'm just going to talk about that as well. So RPOs, it's the length of time permitted where you can potentially lose data. RTO, it's at what point the failure happens up to when you restore the service. At maximum tolerable outage is the amount of time that the system would be unavailable before a financial loss occur. So as you can imagine, during the lockdown period, when you're working for a supermarket, we have an operating hour of 24/7. So it's really challenging to get a time when you want to do a migration. So we we knew our work was cut out for us. And a couple more gotchas in the mix. So to state the obvious, we had massive difference between our production and pre-production environment. All applications have integration points with each other, so it's very tightly coupled. Um, the monolithic databases that we have also use linked servers. People have limited knowledge on the middleware integration, so we do have a lot of middleware integrations that's managed offshore. And stale documentation. And of course, with people coming and going, you really end up to a point where, you have limited subject matter experts in that space. Yeah, so I know some of you here are visual folks, so here's what it looks like in the C4 diagram. What are the slides, data flows? I'm kidding, that's not what it looks like. It looks like this. Enterprise spaghetti. We have our work cut out, but we're determined and we welcome the challenge. We want to make sure that Sally can buy her baked beans, Tim can buy his avocado, his first mashed avocado, and for me at least, I want to be able to buy toilet paper online. So the first solution we looked at, it's a lift and shift migration. Just a recap, a lift and shift migration. It's a migration strategy, moving your on-prem servers to Azure in infrastructure as a service environments. Or the selling point here, there's no operating system, database, or application changes as you move to Azure. And the tool that we used at the time, it's ASR, so we used Azure Site Recovery to do it. On the high level, I'm just going to describe the high level steps that we did when we had to go at it. So first up, we did some discovery. Of course, you want to collect some data. You want to understand the virtual machines that you have on-prem, including the size, the storage, and then work out what that might look like on Azure when you create. And then any DNS tagging network changes, you have to capture all of that as part of the data collection. Next up, we deploy the ASR appliance. So configured any account permissions required, created the recovery services bulk, good, and enable the replication and run the drill. So when you enable the replication, you have to create some policies, and then you can do a test failover, if you will, when you're running the drills. After that, so as you're replicating your servers from on-prem to Azure, you can actually monitor any issues, any errors in place. And then after that, this is probably the fun part. You execute a cutover activities. So essentially to describe what happened, it's you do your final configuration, like installing ASR mobility agent and all that stuff. Once you're ready, you power off all the virtual machines that you have on premise, and you power on the virtual machines in Azure. That's essentially the cutover for that. And then once all those virtual machines are switched on, configure your DNS changes, any firewall changes, any application setting changes. We'll do that there. And after that, and finally, you can test and do your post-migration checks. Cool. Happy days. So the outcome after that failover in pre-production, we had 20 VMs migrated using ASR. Not sure if anyone noticed, but one of our database servers that's using always on AG cluster caught using lift and shift there. So we created 2 nodes in Azure, and then during the cutover activities, we switched the primary to the ones in Azure. Outcome though of this, as we have roughly 33 issues raised, and the issues that we had were ranging from database issues, so missing jobs, linked servers, and SSIS packages failing, network and resources issues, so DNS connection issues, missed app gateway and load balancer settings. Firewall settings, we also missed a lot of those. So some of our monolithic applications talk to APIs that are deployed either in Kubernetes or ASE, and some of those were controlled by having those firewall rule settings. And for the middleware, we had some jobs that stopped due to CNAME connection issues or just in general some incompatible issues.
Excuse me, should I have a question? I'm got confused about the two nodes in always on AG. You mean the SQL server, the database server?
Yep.
On where? AG. Idea.
Oh, sorry. So it's always on availability group. So that's a recovery solution that we have for one of our SQL Server. Yes, SQL Server availability. So what worked well and what were our learnings after doing that? So, well, first and foremost, lift and shift worked really well with simple applications. So as you may have seen earlier, we have applications and databases that we're running in a single instance, work really well when we do the lift and shift. We wanted to have a look whether we can use availability zones, but if you're using a lift and shift migration, it's not supported. Executing test failover activities. So this one, if you want to execute test failover activities, it would only mimic your production network configuration. So when you hit test failover, you can test the connection to those virtual machines in Azure, but you can't really test the application itself because you're using a test network after all, so you don't have any of those configurations. Also, due to the tight coupling between the applications, it meant that it was all or nothing for us. So when we did a test failover, everything had to go all at once. If we were to roll back, everything had to be rolled back all at once as well. Otherwise, if we have some applications in Azure and we still have some on-prem, then you run into some networking issues. And at the time, we had limited bandwidth in our Azure Express route. Also, we learned the hard way. We discovered hard-coded IPs, so that was a bit unfortunate. Time zone difference. So while we were doing this piece of work, we were working with the Microsoft Consulting Services. And of course, when COVID hit, everyone was trying to digitize everything, right? So we had challenges getting folks here in New Zealand to help us do the work. And when we did it, we had folks who are based in Turkey and in India. So what that meant for us is that as we're working towards discovery work, had to usually our stand-ups would happen in the afternoon. And if there's something that we need, we have to wait until that happens. If there's something that they find or something that needs to have to wait for the next day. So it wasn't sustainable for us. And we decided to do a fix forward. We didn't do a rollback because we wanted to measure how long it would take for us to resolve any issues that may arise using Liberty. So it took us 3 days to resolve all those issues. Good, not when you have when you're in a lockdown. That means for 3 days, there's a potential that our customers can't online, and it's actually not a good thing. The biggest learning here, it's not all doom and gloom. There's actually a really awesome story to tell using that solution. So as the team was testing, after failing over, they were testing the application, everything was going well, ran some performance tests. Little did they know that the database in Azure, in one of those applications, actually corrupted. And it failed back on premise. No one noticed, which is good, because no one noticed. That means they were still able to continue what they were doing. It failed back. So that SQL server that's configured to have an always-on AG failed back to on-prem. So what that meant for us, and that's a win. It's a good thing because that provided us with a safe path how we can migrate our data to Azure without too much disruption. So that's pretty cool.
You found a feature that wasn't there.
Hey, that's really cool. So the decision with the lift and shift migration, because of how long it took to store the services back online. It was a no-go. Went back to the drawing board and we ended up doing the parallel approach. So a parallel approach, to describe it, it's a like-for-like copy of the on-premise environment to Azure, and they're both running alongside each other in tandem during transition. To describe effort and the approach and all that stuff. So the approach for a parallel migration, it's high touch because you're deploying new servers per application. The effort required, it's complex because you need to have significant team involvement during assessment and planning. Databases, so based on that story that I just mentioned earlier, gave us a path to how do we do our databases better, especially for those applications that were running in a single instance. So we upgraded our databases, migration velocity. So this can vary, but what this means is that our teams are in control of when they do things. From a scalability standpoint, because we're creating all the servers from scratch, that also means that we get to choose which availability zone we're deploying those virtual machines. And then finally, the cutover. So it's not an all or nothing now. It gave us an opportunity to phase over per application, which was really cool. So how did we do it? We use automation infrastructure as code. So we use Terraform to provision the Azure resources. We have some pre-approved golden images. So those golden images would have things that we needed internally, whatever that might be for security or threat detection or CM and stuff like that. So we upgraded our workloads to Windows Server 2019 and to also minimize the variations between the Linux distro that we use. We moved everything to Red Hat. PowerShell DSC to automate the config of the Windows machines in Bash for machines. And for the databases, so for it's running in SQL Server 2012 and the ones that are on a single instance, so we upgraded them to SQL Server 2019, configured always on availability group single subnet on all of those, tested failover and failback multiple times, so that's amazing. And for application deployment, we already use Azure DevOps, but as we were running those Terraform scripts, we were using Azure DevOps as well. From a team standpoint, so internally, we had a core team. We have 2 infrastructure engineers, a network engineer that we talk to for consults. We have a database admin and database developer, a test automation engineer. And for each of those mission critical applications, we have at least 2 software engineers in the mix where possible. And we also have folks who will do the performance testing and as needed, working closely with the integration engineers. We also had a ton of help from Microsoft as we were doing this, and a lot of interactions, and we were working with Datacom at the time when we were doing it. So the outcome of that is, so we have 27 virtual machines created in parallel to those on-prem environments. So pre-production and production are all set up the same scripts. It's just a different subscription. We created 2 nodes per application, so 8 in total, because the 5th one it's already always on AG. What is a migration without a bit of drama, right? So, and when we cut over to production, so we can only do as much as we can in pre-production. When we cut over to production, we ran into some performance degradation issue in SQL. So the team had worked tirelessly to investigate and have a look at the root causes of this. Probably just one. There's multiple causes of it, but these were the major reasons why it was happening. So the VMware-based infrastructure that we have was running vMotion at the same time. And we also have suboptimal join, subqueries with suboptimal joins. And I believe in our documentation, it says we're using a cardinality estimator that was introduced back in 2014. It was behaving differently. So the temporary fix for us was to run SQL in compatibility mode. Will work well. Yay, virtual machines are deployed in multiple availability zones, so that's really cool. Automation allowed us to trust the setup in pre-production. Similar, we can say apples versus apples, not apples versus orange. The window of failure after cutover was a lot less because the teams were able to test applications before cutover. We were able to rehearse the failover and fail back multiple times pre-production. Work was more sustainable with team members as well. Working with a local partner meant that it was a lot easier to interact because we're all working in the same time zone, and we were also working with folks in Australia, but it's only a 2-hour difference, so it was okay. And this one was a bonus because we managed to. Anyone here using ServiceNow in their companies?
Fortunately, yes.
ServiceNow? Yeah, fortunately, yes. Yeah, so we use ServiceNow as well, and we were able to incorporate change management automation as part of the process. Learnings. So I guess, if I were to describe the learnings here, the first one would be one that will always go down in the book for me. So we have our traditional sysadmin folks learning how to use Terraform, Azure DevOps. Hey, they didn't even use Git before, and they learned how to use Git. That's pretty cool. Work with a team at Microsoft and their partners because it really cut down a lot of the time in terms of the guesswork. If you're not sure about something, working with Microsoft and Datacom at the time, it was really cool. Consider the time it takes when replicating, especially when there's limited bandwidth. When you're transferring data between on-prem to Azure. And this one, we learned along the way that, if you work with your CSAM, you can raise support tickets ahead of time so that you have folks on standby just in case something goes wrong. So suffice to say, we went ahead with parallel approach. And then after that, what were the next steps that we did? So we have some applications that were, by the way, I failed to mention, some of our applications are like 15 to 20-year-old applications, right? So it's really challenging to untangle some of those things. And some of them already were designed at the time to run in a single instance. So we got to a point now where we are re-engineering our critical applications so that it can run in multiple instances and applications and in Kubernetes. Where it makes sense, we've been doing a lot of decoupling using event-driven architecture and microservice architecture. And right now we're exploring the options to move from SQL Server to managed instances. Innovating at pace. So with this, it really accelerated our product development as well, because you can leverage things like automation, and we're able to adopt emerging technologies by experimentation at low cost because you can create resources in Azure, deploy whatever you need to do. If it doesn't work, you can just destroy it. And also from a cost optimization standpoint, of course, when you have on-prem servers, you normally would over-provision that because it's not easy for you to scale out or scale up. You need to check whether you have the resources to do so. And when we did the parallel approach, we did the like for starters, and then had a look at how we can right-size some of those. We're also exploring virtual machines that can be switched off outside business hours to save some more moolah. All right, so if I were to summarize some key takeaways around the talk, it's consider lift and shift for simple migrations. And I'm putting a caveat here because I know that ASR has been superseded by Azure Migrate already, so make sure that you talk to folks from Microsoft. Your mileage may vary. Consider parallel migration for mission critical workloads. Account and plan for the time it takes for the data transfer. So at the time when we were doing this, it took a day for 10 terabytes for 1 gigabit bandwidth. So make sure that when you plan and you raise your change windows and all that stuff, make sure that that's accounted for. Use the expertise of the Microsoft professional services, Azure community, and Microsoft partners. Seriously cut down the time and the guesswork associated with it. And this one is a highlight, I suppose. Be deliberate about your internal team's learning and provide a safe space for them to fail and learn. Like I said, we have folks who are doing ClickOps, and you need to be really deliberate about adding them in that group, making sure that they're part of the process. And sure, it's going to be slower, but now we're getting to a point where folks who traditionally would do ClickOps are advocating for automation and doing things with it. So give them that space and time, and of course, provide that safe space for them.
It's very important.
And final thoughts. Now, once you've migrated to the cloud, you have to tell your boss, your CTO, or CIO, that's just a beginning. What an incredible journey ahead. Moving your virtual machine from one to the other, you're probably not unlocking the full potential of what public cloud can provide. So, think about when you move to the cloud or public cloud, you can unlock value drivers like speed to value, elasticity, cost transparency. I'm not saying cost savings, cost transparency. So now you can see how much it costs to run an application, and of course, innovation. So that's all I have. The floor for questions.
Questions? Got any questions online? Got any
We have
questions
one
online?
question.
There we go.
That's a question. So yeah, definitely feel a story because we did pretty much like the same approach. So when we first migrated to cloud, wasn't like very successful in the beginning. So we did exactly the same. So we did like a parallel situation, exactly like this. So my question is like when you are running parallel, did you guys run into any reconciliation problems, especially on like a data warehouse and database?
We did, but it's not something that we can't handle. So we were well equipped, and the disruption was really not so much.
Gotcha. So how long did it take you guys?
Entire thing and
Yeah.
cutting over and all that stuff. We actually had to pick a time where it's off peak, if you will.
I see.
It took us 3 to 4 hours. For the smaller ones, it was a lot faster.
Gotcha.
So usually the steps were, you stop all the running services and all that stuff, do the final backup, restore it, and then you do the process and then bring all the jobs running back.
Yeah, so our strategy is like we have a team also overseas. So they're based in the States. And so like when we're running like the reconciliation stuff, so there's like a time lag and pretty much exactly
Yeah.
like the same situation like you said.
It's
Yeah.
always good when you have people, not necessarily next to you because we were in COVID at the time, but because everyone was working pretty much in the same time zone. Everyone was in the zone and in the game. Other questions?
You said you looked at the lift and shift,
Mhm.
but you said you actually implemented it, or you did a test run?
Yeah, we did it on our pre-production environment.
Oh, sorry, I missed that part.
That's okay. Yeah, so yeah, we're not crazy enough to
So
do
you
expected
actually- I was just
production.
And, if you got the series of 3 days, I thought, you must have done it, surely. But I missed the pre-production.
Yeah, it was pre-production. Yeah, so we didn't know what ASR was at the time, so we also did our due diligence. We tried a simple virtual machine for starters, so that we kind of understand what we're getting ourselves into, and then after that, okay, we're kind of comfortable, we understand what was happening. Let's try it in a pre-production setting.
When did you actually do the parallel change?
So not long after that, you gotta have to,
Like last year, this year?
last year.
Yeah.
But you didn't notice it.
Well, I actually noticed your website's changed, your bunch and logins and everything, and it kept on changing. I thought, I wonder if they're doing something to make it better because it's not working
Oh,
properly.
look, that's one of our main goals at Countdown. We want to make Kiwis' lives a little better every day. So always trying to make things easier for our customers. Cool.
Just a clarification, have you migrated only your pre-production system from Azure or also migrate production system as well?
Pardon?
Have you only migrated your pre-production system Azure or production system as well?
Oh, cool. I'm sorry, just to repeat the question, have we migrated our production only or including production? So the answer to that is we migrated production.
Or is it production system? Oh, okay.
A few questions online. First question from Serini. Why AKS over container apps?
Yes, over container apps. So yeah, so we actually had a separate program of work that we used in our e-stores, and we explored AKS at the time. I think the team that we were working with understood AKS more than container apps. So from a knowledge transfer, it was a lot easier for us.
Then from Stuart Bowen, all the ASP folks online, thanks for joining. Could you provide some more details around your discovery phase? What lessons did you learn?
Discovery phase.
Yeah. Question, Stuart.
What lessons did we learn? There's really a lot of unknowns, which was scary. During the discovery phase, when you're dealing with applications that have lived for 15 to 20 years, that's really challenging. It also opened up a lot of our challenges with how we document things, how we interact as a group, because we're dealing with folks from overseas as well. There's not a lot of documentation to work with, so it was a breath of fresh air when we did parallel migration, because what that meant for us is we were able to document everything from the infrastructure all the way to the nitty-gritty of the applications. I hope that sufficed. Is there anything in particular that, yeah?
No, it was just like any lessons learned. Stuart, if you do have any follow-up questions, just comment below. But we've got another question from Greg. When you say parallel, was it active-active with load shared over both environments, or active-passive as you slowly cut workloads over?
It was active passive. So it was running both at the same time. The way we tested the ones in Azure, so you can directly connect to those in Azure. And during the cutover activities, we just switched from the active from on-prem to Azure. So it wasn't running at the same time where we were putting like 20% in the new one. It was a 100%.
Awesome. And then also touching on training, what difficulties did you find in bringing the team along the journey for infrastructure as code?
Yeah.
Do you still find you're having to manage config drift often?
Yeah, we do. In terms of config drift, the training that we did for people, we actually threw them on the deep end. So once you haven't done Terraform, or if I were to go back to that example with some of our sysadmin folks, we had to be very deliberate about getting them to shadow people who knew more about that particular technology. We got them to join peer reviews. So, even if it's just having a look at what people have done and then giving them some small bits and pieces to work with, and, safe enough for us to get them to learn that piece of technology. And yeah, it was, yeah.
Cool. Did the running costs pan out? This is from Matt Seller. Did the running costs pan out how you thought? And are you doing any particular cost optimizations?
Yeah. So we knew that, and it was a decision that we had to make, because originally, we had a means and opportunity to optimize the virtual machines already. But because we need to make sure that we get the confidence from our product people, for example, we made that decision that, right, let's do that like for like. If the setup was, say, 10 CPUs here or 12 CPUs here with 64 gig of RAM, try to make sure that the SKUs that we chose were the same. I mean, you can't expect 2 CPUs on-prem and 2 virtual CPUs. We had to work that out. So we made that decision as a business to do that first, and then we do the cost optimization after. It just takes out all the conversations around performance. How are we going to do the performance? So to get that out of the way, it's the same. You can run performance tests. You have the baselines the same. And then so right now, from a cost optimization standpoint, you can see the utilization of your virtual machine. So you can pretty much work out the sizing. So there's a thing that I mentioned earlier about right sizing. We can have a look at the utilization, post-migration, and post-COVID, our utilization was 5% of the VMs. And of course, you're wasting a lot of money there because you're paying for something that you're not using. So you can shrink that down to a lower SKU, if you will. Also have a look at, and look, we have applications deployed that's running in single instances. So we can't just switch virtual machines off because some of the core functionalities will stop working. So as part of that, when you manage to decouple some of those things, then you can start switching things off as well, off peak.
You have one more question online, but Nigel's got his hand up, so.
Did you go through the well-architected framework checklist online?
When we were doing this,
Yeah, or afterwards?
yes, we're currently doing the well-architected framework thing. We did the assessments and all that stuff. So we're working with one of Microsoft's partner. To go through.
Did it show anything up you were surprised or have been able to action on? For?
No, it wasn't surprising at all. We knew that the cost will be a lot higher, and the outcomes when you do the assessment will actually tell you. And it was actually really cool that you have the recommendations as well to say, right, if you use this queue and you have an indication of how much you're saving after that, and the savings that we're looking at, we're talking about over 1,000 posts. So it's really good.
So I think that you guys have migrated all your virtual machines from on-premises to Azure now, right?
Just for this particular.
So since my thinking is that it was using like your virtual machine before, now it's in Australia. Do you guys, if you're running your website from there, do you see any latency to your customer?
Yeah, sure. The question is, are we experiencing latency issues? We do. So post that, we had some latency issues. So the team, we're actively working on how we can make sure that we optimize for that. But originally when it was just that, when our team members in stores are picking orders, it has to go through Azure and then back. So we do experience latency issues at the time. Any other?
There's a couple more questions, but I like this question from Edwin. Would you do anything differently?
Anything differently? Actually, no. For me, like I said a while ago, the learnings that we took out of this exercise meant that we know more around migration, and we have a lot of workloads that are sitting on-prem, and the learnings that we took there, it's very, very valuable. No, we'll do the same thing again if I have to. Well, ideally, not during a COVID lockdown, so there's a lot less pressure, or the business hours were a lot more palatable. But yeah, I mean, the team have actually gone a long way after this. So, they're a lot more informed, they're a lot more knowledgeable, and yeah.
You moved the applications over and you moved the databases over. Did you move the identities over?
Identities.
Like, how did your online people log in?
Yeah, so we actually have a hybrid of our identities as well. So we use Active Directory on-prem, but we do have an Azure version of it. So it was really just a switch over. It wasn't
The AD replicates up to the cloud.
already. So it was a lot easier for us in that aspect.
Your identities are still on premise basically then.
No, so we have on-premise and we have in Azure, and those things are federated. But when we were doing this particular project, those existed already. So when we migrated, instead of using the one on-prem, it's the one that's already available in the cloud.
When you do online shopping, do you authenticate to the cloud?
You said you had maybe I missed the question because I'll pop out. You said you had third-party apps, MSC, I think was something, but you had third-party apps that were offshore, I'm assuming. because the.
On the middleware.
Middleware, yes. So was there anything documented for those apps to actually bring it in context for you? Like, had they already done an Azure migrations?
Yeah, I'm sure, Microsoft and then Woolworths did a big buzz about moving our SAP servers from
Yeah.
on-prem to Azure. Was there anything documented? Absolutely. That's actually one of the awesome things after that after the migrations, we have a pretty comprehensive set of documentation that this was done last year, and without those documentation, I probably would have forgotten half of it.
Yeah.
Was there any particular challenges using Terraform, working with multiple environments, or anything that you can remember?
Challenges?
Or you're happy with it?
Yeah, we're reasonably happy with it. We've got a couple of ex-Countdown folks here. You can ask them the real thing. But yeah, as far as I'm concerned, it's actually really good. We needed to secure the state files though. Yeah, so we have to lock those things down. Awesome.
We do have two questions.
So I'm gonna let you go, Judy.
Were you able to adopt cloud-native networking technologies such as app gateways, vWAN, Azure firewalls, etc., or did you find that the blockers that pushed you down? Did you find blockers that pushed you down the traditional NDA route?
Actually, as part of the parallel approach, we used app gateways and load balancers that was provided by Azure, and yeah, so we Terraform scripts for all of those things as well. It was really cool.
And then the last question, I think, just not to keep you hostage here, how do you go about communicating the continued value of this presumably costly migration to the business, and how does it set up the company for the future?
Well, the way I would describe it when we were articulating the why around this, so just to go back to what I mentioned earlier, we were trying to solve it as part of our disaster recovery process. And this is kind of like a health insurance. You only realize the value of it when you need it. And at the time, sure, it was performing. We might run into some resource constraints and stuff, but when something goes wrong, how much are you going to lose versus the investment that you're making for that? That's quite a, if you do the maths, it's insane.
Offline for 3 hours, or offline for 3 days.
Exactly, and yeah. Sweet. Look, my details are here. If you have any other questions, please feel free to, share the
Presentation. Or is it?
share the presentation. I'll have to check whether that's okay to share, but yeah. Thank you.
Hey, look, thank you, Judy. On behalf of the Azure meetup, I would really like to thank you for sharing your story, because it is amazing to have your story. But I'd also like to say thank you for all the work you guys did during lockdown, when you were really working so hard and keeping us all fed and with toilet paper. So I definitely owe you huge amounts, and you and your team. So thank you so much. And this is just a tiny little gift. So please, again, thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah. So thank you everyone for coming.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
So lucky to have such amazing presenters to come and share their stories with us. Please share this with your friends to come along.
It's pretty good.
Just want to say about the Cosmos.
Oh, yes, and we also have another event next week. We're just trying to pack them in. So one of our senior CSAs, Galina Polyakova, she is going to come in and
2 weeks time.
2 weeks time? 2 weeks time, sorry.
I was going to say, I'm thinking,
She's going to share all the secrets about Cosmos TV, and there are a lot of them. Definitely recommended if you are ever thinking about modernizing your Cosmos. She's amazing. So yeah.
What's right?
I haven't seen you in ages. How you doing?